Okay, so good morning, everyone. Welcome to Tuesday, October the 20th, apparently. Week 7, Columbia College, Vancouver, BC, Canada, Earth. That was assumed. The Earth wasn't assumed, but North America was assumed. No, I just thought I'd confirm that for all of you. You are indeed on Earth. You're not on Mars or the Moon or anywhere else. Okay, so Ayushi's here. Good morning, Ayushi. And Ananda's here. Good morning to you. And Kevin is here. Hey, Kevin. And Shania is here. Hello, Shania. I guess that's good evening to you, Shania. Yesterday, we'll dive right in here. Yesterday we were talking about genocide, right? The practice of attempting to basically destroy or exterminate a particular group of people. And again, you don't necessarily have to outright kill people, although of course we've been talking about the Holocaust, in which that's exactly what happens. But you don't have to just kill people. You can bring about the end of a group in a number of different ways, and those still count as genocide, right? You actually don't have to kill a single person in order to engage in genocidal activities. You can go about things in a much more subtle fashion. And I don't think we'll get a chance to talk about it in this class. In social justice, we definitely will, and I think we definitely did, talking about how the treatment or the experience of First Nations people in Canada here can be considered a cultural genocide. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. So, and you know, the Canadian government never purposely went out and started murdering Indigenous people. That didn't happen. But a lot of other things happened that add up to cultural genocide or even full-on genocide. So we talked about genocide. We said there were some predictable stages that led to the extermination of people, and so genocides weren't accidental, they weren't unforeseeable or unpredictable. In fact, there were steps that happened prior to it. And so the idea was that we could identify these steps and actually intervene early before a genocide takes place. We were talking yesterday, well, I guess Friday and a little bit yesterday, some of these questions appeared in terms of what was the purpose of labeling something a genocide? What good is it, right? Especially when, you know, genocides happened in the past. We kind of experienced that a little bit yesterday in the story of the bell, where we saw that some people actually questioned, you know, what's the big deal? That was a long time ago. Everybody's dead. Germany's a totally different country. What's the issue here, right? And so that was a legitimate question that we were kind of grappling with. And so we watched that story, and I guess what I was trying to do is pull out some of the larger issues that were involved in there, because I think we could probably all agree that the bell is kind of small potatoes, right? In terms of nobody's going to die, right? If the bell gets taken down or if the bell stays up, you know, the overall difference for the people of Germany is basically zero, right? There's really no difference. However, the bell is connected to a lot of larger issues, right? In part, it was connected to how this country deals with a very dark chapter of its past, right? And lots of countries have, you know, chapters of their history that are not so great, right? And Canada is no exception. Canada has chapters of its history which are pretty ugly and problematic. This one for Germany is, you know, particularly ugly, right? And so how do they engage with that? How do they deal with that? And so what did we see? What did we hear from some of the German people in the video yesterday in terms of how they felt about their past and what they felt it meant? What did we hear from them? What did they say to us, those Germans? Sure, anybody in the video. What did they say to us yesterday?
That the schoolgirl said something about that era, like teaching us and showing us a new path, and like we're sorry now, but we're too far away from it.
Right. So we heard from that young woman. She was a high school student. She was scrubbing those graves, and she kind of said, well, yeah, we know this happened. We learned about it, but that was a long time ago. I think Germany has moved on and has learned its lesson, which I think is an accurate statement. So her question was like, why are we still doing this? Why are we still talking about it? Why am I out here on a Thursday morning in the cold scrubbing a gravestone? This is ancient history, right? I think I'm paraphrasing a little and exaggerating, but I think that's kind of what she was thinking. What other things did we hear from people?
Older people, older generations thought that it has to be remembered.
Right. So I guess the teacher that wrote the opinion letter about the bell, saying that the bell should be taken down. Right. She was kind of an older woman, but she said that that this bell can't be there, but it's still important to remember the history of what happened. Right. What else did we hear? We heard from the mayor of that little town, whatever that little town was called. Sorry, one second. Was he a big deal?
I'm asking, like, what's his opinion, something like, is there a big deal?
Kind of, yeah. He didn't really see too much issue with the existence of the bell, right? So he said, yes, it's there. It's been there for decades. I don't see the problem, right? So that was his perspective, right? Aliana?
The mayor was that guy who was talking when they were doing the golden stool.
Oh yeah, they were talking about the stumbling blocks, right? Whatever the word was in German. I don't speak any German. Those little stumbling blocks, right? So that artist, he didn't say anything, but he was putting them in terms of, or putting them into the cobblestones in front of people's houses to remind them of who lived there and what happened to those people, right? Because they were sent away. I guess that could probably lead us into the next part. So the ways that Germany is engaging with the past are those stumbling blocks, right? That artist was creating these blocks so that people would remember. What other things do we see in terms of the Germans remembering or connecting to that past? Yeah, the Holocaust Memorial, right? So it's a bunch of pillars of stone, but it's almost like a bit of a maze kind of thing. I've never been to it, but it seems like a strange kind of environment to wind yourself through. There's the Holocaust Memorial. There's those stumbling blocks. What else is there?
I have a question. That artist who did the stone, they say in the video that like sometimes it just goes away before the parade thing. Why?
I think he's just trying to. I think, artists are artists, right? But I think what he's trying to do is ensure that the focus and the story is on the blocks themselves and the people's names who are on the blocks. And so I think he doesn't want any sort of attention. He doesn't want the news report to be about him and who he is and why he does it. He doesn't want that to be the story. He wants the block to be the story. So he shows up, he puts them in, and by the time any sort of news crew can get there, he's already gone, right? And so if the news people want to do a story, the story is about the blocks. The story is not about him, right? And so I think that's why he runs. He wants the statement to be the art or the blocks, not him.
Since that news was years ago, what actually happened to them?
I think I think they said at the end of the video that the city council voted to take it down.
No, they said the church officials said don't remove it. It stays there, but it doesn't.
Really? What was the name of? I don't know. Let's see here. Oh, here we go. New York Times. There's a New York Times article about it. Let's see what it says at the end of it here. No. Here we go. September 29th, 2019, German church replaces controversial Nazi bell. So they got a new church bell. It's pretty shiny, actually. Let's see. The original bell.
So I think the video we watched, I think it was 2017.
What's that? Yeah.
The video was recorded very well.
What's that? The article that I'm reading here is from 2019. So 2 years later, it says that they replaced the bell, and it says the old bell will be exhibited elsewhere on the church grounds with a display to explain its place in history. In this way, we can avoid it becoming a place of pilgrimage for those neo-Nazi diehards, says Pastor Michael Kohler. Okay, so the bell is officially out of the tower now. There's a new bell in there, but again, the bell's being displayed, and we talked about that in terms of context, right? Is that the Nazi symbol has a lot of power and meaning, and so to just display it anywhere, it has its own significance, right? You need to kind of frame it in a certain way to change the meaning, right? So I think that's what what the church hopes to do, right? Is to frame this bell as a piece of history and a piece of dark history, not as, not as something to be venerated or appreciated, right? It's a reminder of something ugly, right? Okay, so there was the blah blah blah. Well, I guess the bell is now a way in which they engage with history, right? The bell has moved from a church bell, a thing that serves the church, to something that is remembering of history, right? It's displayed in the public. There's a Holocaust Memorial. There's the stumbling blocks. There was that art exhibition, right? How could it happen here? And so I think where we got to yesterday, or at least I hope where we got to yesterday, was the idea that every country needs to tell itself a story about who it is, right? And most of you, if you grew up in a country, you probably learned that story of the country that you lived in, right? Your country taught you your country's history, right? The country tells itself a story about who and what it is, right? And so every country has to figure this out, and Germany has to figure this out too. But for Germany, in the 1950s, after World War II, of course, you can imagine it became very complicated, right? Because this is not a story you want to tell yourself about your country, right? You do not want to tell yourself that you are, your country is a bunch of, Aryan supremacists who brutally murdered millions of people. That's not a great origin story for you, right? Especially if you don't want to be the villain. And so Germany's had a tough time kind of negotiating this very difficult past. And actually in the video they say that, right? They say that, for a long time, Germans were very hesitant to be nationalistic, right? They talked about Germany as, oh, this is a great place to live, right? They weren't like waving the flag and saying, "Rah, Germany," right? That was a little too soon, right? So they've been very cautious about their nationalism, because in the 1930s and 40s, their nationalism really got out of control, right? And so we said we kind of have a controversial question, right? And the bell is part of it, but it's part of a bigger issue. And lots of times we see this in not so much in history, but in the media, right? We see people arguing over one thing, but that one thing is really connected to a bigger issue, right? And here I'm kind of suggesting that, yes, people were arguing about the bell, but the bell actually wasn't the question, right? The question was, how should we remember history, right? How should we think of ourselves? How should we think of Germany, right? And I said that I think it was depending on where you sat on that issue, either one side or the other, also depended on an even bigger issue or an even bigger question, which I think was this, is do you think that the Holocaust is an aberration, a weird thing that happened, or is it a reflection of ourselves, right? Is it something that is kind of seems to be a part of human nature and, can and has happened again, right? And so, again, the bell is one thing, but it's connected to a bigger issue, right? A bigger layer on the outside, and then an even bigger issue on the outside in terms of this almost existential question, right? Of what are humans like? What is the nature of humanity? Are we good and sometimes horrible things happen, or are we, very flawed creatures and we need to be very cautious about history, right? Okay, so we talked about those things, and I just wanted to touch on one more thing before we leave this genocide thing for now. Anyway, there'll be an opportunity to touch it again in a little bit, but I want us to read this very short article. It's I think a page and a half or 2 pages or something like that. It's a very short article that I pulled from a human rights website. And so it tells us a little bit about what's happening in Western China currently, okay? And so I'll warn you before we start reading of a couple things. Number one, the things that you'll read in this article, China disputes, okay? So these things are happening in Western China. They're happening involving a group called the Uyghurs, who are kind of a Central Asian population of Muslim people who traditionally live in that area, but China has kind of since come to, control their land, and so now these people find themselves living within China, but they're not ethnically Chinese. So the Chinese government will dispute basically everything that shows up in this article, and I don't have an article that explains the Chinese position. So again, this is very one-sided. That said, the Chinese government tends not to be super transparent, and so I'm not entirely sure how much I would believe from the Chinese side. But that said, again, this is a one-sided view of what's happening there, but we can still read and think about how some of these things might connect to what happened in Nazi Germany, okay, and see if there's any kind of parallels, see if there's any overlap, and see if there's anything any lesson from the past that we might be able to sort of put into context in the present here, okay? So the article itself is in Microsoft Teams under Files, as it usually is. And so can I give you 12 minutes just to read through this and maybe think about some of the questions that are in here? It's a pretty easy read. It's an easy reading article. But yeah, let's do that, okay? Put 12 minutes on the clock. Okay, can we talk about this article a little bit? All right. So maybe I can start with this. So who had heard anything about what this article is talking about before reading it? Had you heard about this? Amanda, yes? B? No? Rod? No? Rose, had you heard about this? No? Liana? No? Albert? No? Ashley, had you heard about this? You had? Yeah? Ty? Had you heard about this before or no? No? And Helen? No? So, yeah, interestingly, this is not, it's not front page news, unfortunately, but people are aware of it. It does show up in the news from place to place. And again, if you do a quick Google search, you'll find lots of articles associated with it. Did you want to ask something? No? Okay. So let's start out here. Let's start out with the first question. So what seems to be occurring here that constitute a genocide? How's the author trying to say, hey people, we have a genocide on our hands, look what's happening. What kind of things are happening, apparently? People are being imprisoned for no reason. The U word, yeah. Uyghur. Yeah. Right. So this particular group of people, the Uyghurs, who are, as they say, did they say a Turkic-speaking people? Turkic. Yeah, so they're kind of Central Asian, Turkic in origin. They're Muslims, that's their religion, and they seem to be being imprisoned, right? And what else seems to be happening to them? They're being sterilized. What does that mean? Are they being cleaned up? Germ-free?
Well, there is something free, but not germ.
It's, yes. What is it? Right. So sterilization means that they surgically or chemically make sure that you cannot have children, right? So there's sterilizations going on. What else is going on?
Forced marriages.
Right. Forced marriages. So they're, okay, what else, apparently? Seems to be some sexual abuse, some forced labor. Seems like that might be the case as well. I'm going to throw this in there, although the article doesn't mention it too much, but there's also pretty significant surveillance on this population. If you look at some footage from the area, you'll see that there are security cameras everywhere, like outside everyone's door, in every street, everywhere. The government has eyes on these people all the time. What else? Right, so their travel has been restricted. What else? Okay, so there's lots of things happening here which I think we can agree are concerning, right? At the very least. Which one of these constitute genocide? How do these align with the rules of genocide that we already know? Which things are happening? Are people being killed?
There being something like dehumanization, maybe, because this process, officials describe Islam as an ideological virus.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh, say that one more time.
Ideological virus.
Yeah, so are they referring to the people? They're referring to religion, right? So they're referring to the religion of Islam as an ideological virus. Why is that a red flag? Yeah, because it's dehumanization, right? It's connecting a certain group of people, this group of Muslims, with a virus, right? And we said that that's concerning, right? When you see people equated with vermin or viruses or something that needs to be exterminated, ding, 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 red flag, right? A siren should go off in your head when that happens, right? So this is a big problem. This is a dehumanization. Just when we were talking about activities constituting genocide, there are some killings apparently that we have reports of that Ayushi mentions. There's some forced labor. There's some servitude going on, it seems, and there seems to be some starvation happening as well, right? There's reports of all of those things. Good work there, Ayushi. Yeah, so we see some dehumanization happening. What else is happening in terms of our stages of genocide? What's that? There's definitely classification, right? So we definitely have a group of people who are ethnically and religiously and culturally different from the sort of dominant group, right? The dominant group are ethnically Chinese, Han Chinese people, and here we have a group of Asian, Turkic people who speak a different language and practice a different culture and practice a different religion, right? They practice Islam. So we have two pretty much separate group of people. We have some evidence of dehumanization. What about organization? Does the government seem to be organized in this regard? Yeah, how do we see evidence of organization here?
The camps, the civilians.
There's a lot of infrastructure that's been created already, right? There's camps, there's video cameras everywhere that are connected back to who knows where, and some sort of government officials are watching. What else do we see? Right, so denial is already it's already happening, right? So we talked about denial as being kind of a last stage. When it's all over, people deny that it ever happened. Here we see the denial happening at the same time, right? The government is saying, oh no, that's not what's happening. Something else is happening. And that was part of the original article as well. They said these stages of genocide can happen, they can happen overlapping and they can happen all the way through. It doesn't have to be 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of these stages exist all the way through, right? So the government is denying it apparently even as it's happening. What other stages do we see? There was organization. Is there polarization happening? Polarized, so kind of pushing these two people into opposition with each other. What do you think? I kind of feel like the paragraph that starts with "as for the question of intent," I think there's a lot in there. Right. So yeah, we change and accept the good races into our own society and torture and eradicate the bad ones. Right? So here we're pretty clearly dividing people into good and bad, right? And good and bad races. And who gets to decide? Apparently the government. Right? The Chinese government is going to decide who's good and bad, and the good ones are going to be even the good ones are going to be changed, right? In order to be accepted, they will be changed, and the bad ones are going to be eradicated, right? And eradicated is kind of a ugly word, right? That's what you do when you have termites in your house, or when you have bed bugs or something like that, you eradicate the pests, right? If you have ants in your house, you eradicate them. That's what you bring the exterminator in for, right? And so again, when you hear people talking about eradicating and humans in the same sentence, again, the little siren in your head should go off. Woo! This is a problem, right? I know our original article talked about militias, right? So sometimes militias are organized in order to give the government deniability. Here that's not the case, right? Because we're dealing with an autocratic government, right? And so the government has full control of everything in China. And so they don't need to distance themselves from their activities. They just do basically whatever they want. Let me see. What's the what interventions is the author calling for? What is he asking us? What are the authors asking Canada to do here? Okay, so first to actually recognize this as a genocide, right? That's the first thing. And the author is kind of trying to make a strong case from the beginning, right? They're saying that the UN Genocide Convention, which we've already talked about, says that these 5 things, any one of those 5 things constitutes a genocide. And the author says all these things are happening, right? These are all, we've had reports of all of these things happening in this region of China, right? So number one, Canada, you need to acknowledge that we have a genocide happening right now, right? This is a live event, right? This isn't the past. This isn't 20 years ago. This is like right now. You need to acknowledge that, right? But that's not all, right? The author's asking for more. What else is the author asking us to do? It gets some of the interventions get a little complicated, but I'm hoping you can.
So they did mention that they say that all products made by these enslaved people should be banned.
Right. So there are companies trading with China, the author argues, that are benefiting from this situation. They're benefiting from the labor of these people and even benefiting from the products of these people, right? There's a very disturbing report of using the hair from these people for what kind of products? What did they say? It's very disturbing. Oh yeah, products made using enslaved Uyghur labor, and some made from the hair of interned Uyghur women, right? So apparently we have companies that are profiting from this situation, right? And so the author is asking us to boycott those products, right? To not buy them, but also not even to import them, right? Canada should ban those products from entering the country, which of course we can do. But there's more even than that. What else is the author asking us to do? There's a little more connected with the company thing. But it's a little more complicated. So we're going to ban the products, right? We're going to boycott and ban those products, but what else can we do?
Support international legal efforts to achieve accountability.
Say that one more time.
Support international legal efforts to achieve accountability.
Right, so they want us to support international legal efforts towards accountability. That is true. What does it mean in the paragraph that starts with, it's it's almost toward the end, and it says, as the United Nations independent international fact-finding mission. What are they saying in that paragraph? It's a little more complicated, but what are they saying there? Right, and what can we do? What can we do to those businesses? Yeah, we can. They're saying we can hold these businesses and the people who own and run them. We can hold them criminally liable for benefiting from a genocide, right? So, if the Chinese government is committing genocide here, and if Bombardier is involved, or who's the gold mining? Dynasty Gold. If Dynasty Gold is profiting from that, those two companies don't get to say, oh, well, it's the Chinese government, so it's not our fault. There's nothing we can do. Go talk to the Chinese government. That's not how it works. The international law says that if your company is benefiting from a genocide and you know about it and you don't do anything about it and you continue to profit from it, you can be criminally liable, right? They can raise charges against you. And so the Canadian government can put pressure on these companies and say, hey, look, we recognize, if we do the first thing the author asks, we recognize a genocide is happening here. We know about it. Now you know about it. Do something about it, right? Stop dealing with the Chinese government or make them stop this. Otherwise, we will hold you responsible, right? So Canada has tools, right? We have tools to put pressure on, maybe not so much on the Chinese government, but we can put pressure on the companies that deal with the Chinese government in this area, right? And we can say, if you don't do something about this, either stop dealing with them or make the Chinese government do something different, we are going to criminally charge you with assisting a genocide or whatever the charge is, right? So that's some good leverage, right? That's a good tool. What else are they asking us to do? Oh, maybe the last one I think is what you mentioned already, Aliana, right? To support international legal efforts to achieve accountability, right? So who is it? Yeah, so there are groups that are trying to legally hold China responsible for what is happening currently, right? So they're calling on Canada to do all these things. Okay, let's take a little break here, and then when we come back, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what we should actually do about this and how this situation is kind of similar to or different from the Holocaust, okay? So let's take a break and then we'll come back and talk about that, okay? All right, so we are back. So this article is describing to us that we have, it seems we have a little bit of a situation on our hands, right? Even though it's difficult to get reports because it seems to be happening within China, and China is not a perfectly transparent government. We seem to be getting reports of detentions and forced labor and sterilizations and deaths and torture and all these things coming out of this particular region of China and connected all with these Uyghurs, right? These sort of Turkic peoples who traditionally live in the area who are Muslims, right? And so maybe the question I'll ask you is, should we be concerned here or should we not? Should we be concerned? I don't know. Is this a problem?
Yeah.
Should we worry about it? Okay. Let's start with this one. So how is this similar to what we've learned about? How is this similar to the Holocaust in which we've already learned about? In what ways is it similar? Or different? How can we compare these two? Okay, there seems not to be any mass killing, right, yet. Yeah, there seems not to be any mass killing. We have results of, or we have reports of some deaths, although it's tough to quantify what's happening. It's tough to get hard numbers of what's happening. It seems like we don't have mass deaths happening. In what other ways is it similar or different?
And how it's being publicized.
Okay, how do you mean that?
Like, wasn't Hitler more like open with his plans?
Yeah, I guess he was. He didn't fully describe what he was going to do, but he was pretty clear about his thoughts about Jewish people and how they had no place in Germany. Here, of course, we only have a very short. We only have some very short quotes from Chinese president, or chairman, I should say, Xi Jinping, but he says that Islam is an ideological virus, a malignant tumor and a weed infiltrating the crops, and efforts at eradication are a logical extension. That's what the author says. And that there'll be no mercy, and that we change and accept the good races into our own society and torture and eradicate the bad ones. That's not Xi Jinping, though. That's professor and military science advisor. So that's another member of the Chinese Communist Party, not Xi Jinping saying that. But is that different from what Hitler was saying? Is it the same? Is it less? Is it more? Right. So there's an element of dehumanization in there, which we should recognize from some of Hitler's propaganda, and I think there's a pretty clear message that that this needs to be eradicated, right? And so there's an extra layer of language here because Xi Jinping is talking about the religion, right? They're saying the religion is a virus and it needs to be. Yeah, it's a weed infiltrating the crops. But of course, do religions exist outside of people? Can you destroy a religion without destroying the people? No, because religion is another thing that is socially constructed, right? Religion is an idea, right? It's not religion isn't a thing, right? It's a shared idea, a shared understanding. The only way you can destroy a religion is to destroy the people that practice it, right? And so either by forcibly re-educating them or by transferring their children out of the group and raising them outside of the religion, or by destroying the group, right? You can't destroy religion without destroying the people, right? Because religion isn't a separate, tangible thing. In what other ways is it similar or different?
It's similar because like they're imprisoning Muslims and Hitler is like imprisoning Jews.
Right? We seem to have camps being built in which people are imprisoned or interned. Right? That's concerning, right? What else do we see? Similar or different? I think I've got one for similarity, but I'll let you.
They both deny
Maybe a difference too. What were you saying?
they both deny
Sure. There's an aspect of denial, right? And so the Nazis are going to try and hide their crimes later on. It seems like this is happening in real time, but there's a element of denial, right? People are saying, "Oh no, that's not what's happening." For the record, I believe that the Chinese government says that these camps are retraining facilities, and so they're training these people to give them skills. I think that's the story. The degree to which that's true, I don't know. Ayushi says there's physical torture being implemented in both cases. Yes, I would say that is true. Other similarities or differences from the Holocaust?
there's like no a great force behind these people.
There's what?
There's no great force. Yeah, like
Great force?
Hitler had a lot of people supporting him.
Oh, okay. Hitler had a lot of people supporting him in Germany. Do you think the Chinese Communist Party has people supporting them in China?
Yeah.
Yeah, probably most of China, right? I'm not sure that it is entirely safe not to support the Chinese government when in China. So that actually might be a similarity as well, right? Is that both of these are authoritarian states in which there's not a lot of room for dissent or criticism of the government, right? What else? Similarities or differences? For similarities, I was going to say that both of these activities seem to be carried out by the state, right? I know we didn't talk about it in detail, but I mentioned with the Rwandan genocide, it was kind of state organized, but a lot of the killing was done by regular people, right? Regular people in militias. They actually did the work. But here, this is not regular people. This seems to be the state, the government organizing this situation. And it seems like it was the same way in Nazi Germany, right? It wasn't militias, it was the formal state was doing it. What else?
I'm not sure about this one, but like for in like Germany's case, they were like angry because of World War One, so because of that it could happen.
Okay. That's true. The Germans were angry because of World War I. I don't think we have any evidence of the Chinese being particularly angry about anything in this case. We did say, however, that in Europe there was a undercurrent of anti-Semitism, right? So Hitler was pretty clearly anti-Semitic, right? He had a strong prejudice against Jewish people. We also said that lots of Western people did as well, right? So he wasn't an anomaly in that way, right? He wasn't different in that way. Here, it seems like the Chinese government has a certain prejudice towards Muslims. Now, is there an undercurrent of that in other places? Yeah, there is, right? Here in the West, in Europe, probably in China, but I don't really know what the population of China is thinking. But there is a lot of anti-Muslim, anti-Islam feelings and prejudices in nations around the world, right? So there's kind of an undercurrent of that as well. So I think we could probably say that that's a similarity, right? We have a supposed genocide happening against a particular group of people, and there is a prejudice against those people that is somewhat widespread, right? Of course, not in every country, but in some. What else can we say? Similarities and differences. The other one I was going to ask is that were the Allies prior to liberating these concentration camps, prior to the Allies arriving in Germany and liberating some of these camps, were the Allies aware of what was happening in Nazi Germany with regard to the Holocaust? Did they know? Probably? Ahmad, what do you think? Maybe?
Maybe not that much likely that they didn't know about it, because let's face it, we have spies. They don't just pick up on the radar. But maybe they just didn't know how widespread that was.
I think that was the case, and I don't know the detail on this for sure, but I think, as far as I'm aware, the Allies did have some clue that Jewish people were being interned. I don't know, I think you're right, I don't think they knew the extent of what was happening, but I think they knew that something was going on and something that was not good. Of course, they were already kind of at war with Germany, so I'm not sure what else they could have done in the meantime to, they were already trying to take over Germany, so there's, they were in the process of intervening, but I'm not sure that they entirely knew. But the question is, most of the world probably didn't know about what was happening in Nazi Germany until the Allies liberated those camps. News reporters came in, wrote articles and said, "Oh my God, you'll never believe what's happening here," right? And then suddenly the Western world knew what was going on in places like Auschwitz. Do we know what's going on here? Seems like we do, right? We don't have the level of detail that we did in Nazi Germany because, of course, we can't get reporters into these camps, right? Because they're still firmly under the control of the Chinese government. The Chinese government is telling us one story about them, and so we can't really get in there and see for ourselves. But does the world know about this?
So, does this article in any way mention like armed intervention, at least as a threat?
In what way? As a possibility?
Yes.
Well, we can talk about that for number 5.
Right, but I think you should just scratch Canada and add the world, because let's face it, Canadian military can't beat China.
Hey.
You guys are
Hey, we can hold our own. We have a tiny military. We can't do anything. So let's transition into that question then. So it seems that we have a genocide on our hands, right? The author is arguing that there are 5 things that constitute a genocide. Any one of those things means that a genocide is happening or has happened. And the author is saying, hey, all of these things are happening against these Uyghur Muslim people in Western China. So we seem to have a genocide on our hands. We've said that there are some similarities to Nazi Germany, there are some differences to Nazi Germany, but regardless of whether it's exactly the same or not, the author is saying we have a genocide here, and the author is calling on Canada to do something about this, right? Because we said at the end of World War I, after the Holocaust, after the Convention on Genocide in 1948, 49. After that, we said never again, right? We never want this to happen again. But then I said there's been 43 genocides since then, so it's not never again. The author points out that there's been a number of genocides that we haven't done anything about. The one in Rwanda is a clear example, especially for Canada, since the head of the UN peacekeeping force was a Canadian. And so here we have another one going on, and the author's saying, hey, are you going to do anything?
So, not the Chinese part. Let's track things a bit back, right? They're committing a genocide. A bit before that, they took control over Hong Kong, right? You look at Hitler, he took control over the Rhineland, and then he went on the genocide, right? Is it possible that we witness Taiwan being invaded next, like Austria, and then some other countries around China?
Bigger question, bigger question, but definitely related to this, right? And so again, is there, is there an opportunity to learn from history here, right? Is there an opportunity to look at the past and say, we know what happened in this situation, mistakes were made, but here are the lessons we've learned. And now, are we being presented with a similar situation? Obviously, there are differences. We're never going to have exactly the same thing happen twice, but here we have a similar situation. And do we have the opportunity to learn from this? Do we have the opportunity, or should we actually do something about this? Or are we going to put our heads in the sand and say, oh, well, I'm sure it'll resolve itself somehow, or I'm sure nothing really bad will happen, right? Because I'm sure that's exactly what people thought with Germany in 1935. I'm sure nothing bad will happen, or hopefully nothing bad will happen with their fingers crossed, right? But as we know, something bad happened. So what should we do about this as Canadians? I'm including you all now. You're all adoptive Canadians. What should we do? It's true. Undoubtedly, China is a bigger country, a country with more people, and a country with a much greater military than Canada. So simply going in with our jets is not a feasible option, right? We're gonna get killed, right? So that's off the table. What's that?
But Canada has that.
Ah, but we have allies. Who are we allied with? The United Kingdom, the Americans, the whole NATO thing, right? We have basically all of Western Europe and Iceland. Don't forget Iceland. Turkey. We have all of these countries. Well, I don't know if Turkey can be counted on at the moment, but China has allies as well. Yeah, I don't know. I think I think Russia and China have a bit of an understanding, but they're also probably wary of each other. So I think they're, I think they'll cooperate to the degree that they see fit, but they also are concerned about each other. Japan, Japan has an alliance with the U.S. I don't know if CETO still exists. There's a Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, but I'm not sure if CETO still exists because Japan would have been in there, the U.S., Philippines, probably another bunch of small islands that most people haven't heard of. Yeah, I'm not sure if CETO is still in existence or not. So again, a straight military intervention is not an option, but we do have a lot of allies, right? So what might we be able to do in terms of talking to our friends and saying, hey, I think we need to do something here, people? Does the United Nations have a role? They are the UN?
They can put us under pressure, but let's face it, that doesn't always work. That almost never works. Until you have a bigger gun, no one's going to do what you want.
Right, and of course the UN has a Security Council on which China sits, right? And so China will try to veto any action that the UN tries to take, I would imagine. But yeah, what
So if you want to take advantage, we can look down south and we can see that Trump is the president. Trump hates China. That could mean these were at least a show force, not a direct military attack, just to show your force and tell them to behave.
does anyone know what Trump said in regard to these camps? Because he learned about them. Was that what you're going to say, Amanda?
I know I was going to say what they can do is quite limited because the American economy depends on the Chinese manufacturing and everything. Because they're a huge market, so they can't really do much because it would affect every other country.
that's a complicating factor to this, right? Is that China and many nations in the rest of the world have a very strong economic relationship, right? How many things in this room do you think are made in China? A lot, right? So we depend on China to manufacture a lot of our things, but of course, China depends on us to actually send the money to buy those things, right? So we have a pretty tight economic relationship, and so either group kind of cutting off the other is, not going to work. But is that a problem or is that an opportunity?
It's a problem.
Is a problem?
But you can also look at it as a kind of opportunity because if the whole Western world, which is a big alliance, they decide that they want to protect human rights and they want to prevent a genocide and they decide to go on an embargo against China, then their own economy may take a bit of a hit at the beginning, but then domestic manufacturers can take the place. However, it's going to take long.
So
We put on economic pressure on the Chinese. That's a factor in the
So one suggestion might be an economic embargo or sanctions or tariffs or some sort of economic pressure on China to get them to change their ways, right? To get them to rethink this. But Amanda's shaking her head. Why no?
Like, when have you ever seen a government put the people over the economy? That never happens. And an embargo wouldn't work because it would hit America harder than China. They can still support themselves, but it would be harder for other countries to do so. And a lot of African countries also import from China.
Right. So a counterpoint, of course, is that
imports a lot from China, but there's something that we could look at it, and then again, we can.
okay, pause 1 second. I just got to do the play-by-play so that everybody online can hear, okay? So Amanda says that the problem, of course, is that any economic pressure that you put on China will hurt us as well, right? There will be a cost to us because they'll try and hurt us back. And again, we rely on them just like they rely on us. So any economic sanctions or measures or pressure we put on China is going to hurt us. And are the people willing to bear that cost? And are politicians brave enough to say, look, Canadians, economically speaking, you're going to hurt for a while, but this is something we need to do. We need to take a stand, and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt your pocketbook, but we need to do this. And are there politicians brave enough to make that choice? Sorry.
So what I was going to say is that we can compare what's going on again with what was going on during the 1930s in Germany. It doesn't look good. They've already taken over Hong Kong, and now they're looking down at Taiwan. They've been looking down at it for some time now. They want it back. They feel like it's theirs, but they can just not take it because of some geological problem. Geography doesn't allow them to land on. What if we don't say anything and they go on and take it? And then what? And then they could be emboldened by that and go take on other stuff. And over you'll have Nazi Germany and China this time. A much larger military, a much larger problem to solve.
Okay, so Ahmad's point here is that, what point in the process are we, right? In Nazi Germany, we saw in the 1930s, we saw Hitler take the Rhineland, and then we saw him unite with Austria, and then he took a bit of Czechoslovakia, and then he took the rest of Czechoslovakia, then he rolled into Poland, and so that process kind of continued on and on until you had a full conflict. And so Ahmad's point here is that, where are we in this process with China? Because they are kind of putting their fingers into Hong Kong and trying to control Hong Kong. They seem to be eyeing Taiwan. There's stuff happening in the South China Sea. And so, are we leading to a point where if we don't intervene earlier, is there going to be a bigger conflict? And of course, nobody knows the answer to that, but is this an analogous process, right? Is this kind of the same thing? And is this an earlier opportunity for us to intervene where, in the past we didn't intervene and then we wound up with a full full destructive conflict.
Chinese government is being inspired by.
What's that?
It's like Chinese government is being inspired by.
Well, I don't know if they're being inspired, but there's definitely similarities, right? We can see some similarities in terms of wanting to reclaim territory that formerly belonged to them, right? Germany wanted to do that. They wanted to reclaim territory they lost in Treaty of Versailles. China wants to reclaim certain territories that belonged to it in the past as well. So there's a similarity there.
So they can be like not prepared because they know that they're going to come to them. So they can prepare.
Well, that's the thing, right? The thing is that we have some similar things happening, but is the end point the same, right? In World War II, we wound up with a full global conflict and a genocide at the same time. Does this lead to the same thing? Does this lead to a full global conflict and a genocide? Or does it lead somewhere else?
If we don't intervene, it might.
If we don't intervene, it might. But intervention has a cost, right?
We're not intervening also at a cost.
Okay.
We can't let this should the same things happen all over again. It's gonna be a lot worse. It's not gonna be just a bit of economic downside, it's gonna be a whole lot of dead bodies. Millions, thousands of dead people should the same thing happen again.
What does it mean? What does it mean if for us not to do anything here? What does that mean? For us to look at this and read this and say, okay, we see this is happening, but what does it mean for us not to do anything?
we don't care.
We're what?
We don't care.
Means that we don't care.
Yeah, things are basically just have a whole lot of century of conflict based on hollow words with nothing to back it up.
Right. So, yeah, how do we say that? Yeah, what are some of Canada's values? What are some of our what are the things that we think are important here in Canada? What's that? Don't say hockey and maple syrup, although those are important. But what are some of the things that are important to Canada?
Everyone's peaceful, so maybe human rights.
Yeah, we are a country that's respectful of human rights. We're a peaceful country. What else do we hold dear? What else? What are our values? Hadil says, yeah, multiculturalism, right? Diversity, inclusion, right? Those are things that Canada is supposed to be in favor of, right? What else? What else are we supposed to be? Human rights, peace, multiculturalism. We're going to vote here in the province in another 4 days. Democracy, right? The rule of the people. Those are all things that we claim to value here in Canada. And so by saying no to this, by saying, oh, well, this is China's business, do as you will, China, what are we doing to our values? Poof? Was that what you said? Yeah, we're basically ignoring them, right? Or we're saying that those values only apply to Canadians, right? Those human rights, they're not really human rights, they're Canadian rights, right? We're saying other people around the world don't deserve the same treatment as us, right? And so is that okay with us? Is it okay for us to simply say, well, I guess that's their problem, these Uyghurs, good luck. Or, well, this is China and China gets to do whatever it wants in its own borders because that's how the world works. Is that okay with us? Is that okay with us to say that? That's a bit of a rhetorical question. You don't need to answer that. But I think that's the unspoken question, right? Is that if we value all those things and we see all of those values being violated and we do nothing, what do those values mean, right? What does it mean to value human rights when you see a clear violation of the human rights of hundreds of thousands of people and you don't do anything, right? What does that mean? Well, yeah, right? Hypocritical, or maybe you don't believe in the things that you think you believe in, right? Anything else we should say about this? We shouldn't say anything else about it?
I think options are limited.
Options are limited. Well, again, what does the author say that we can do? First.
Holding companies accountable, high companies used to.
Right. So we have power over Canadian companies, right? We can talk to companies that are engaged with China and are benefiting from this situation, and we can say, look, we know what's going on there, because the first step is to recognize what's happening as a genocide. We know there's a genocide happening. We know that you're doing business in the region, and you are profiting from this situation, okay? This must stop, right? We can do that as a country, right? We can ban those products from entering Canada. We can put pressure on the people who own and run those companies. There's even a possibility to bring them up on criminal charges if they don't make certain changes. So we can actually do something without even poking at China. Well, that would poke at China, but we don't have to deal with China directly, right? We can recognize this is a genocide. We can talk to our allies. We can put pressure on companies that deal in this part of the world. Other countries can do the same thing, right? And so we can, even if we don't engage China directly, there are things that we can do, right? Might there be economic costs for us? Yeah, there certainly might be. But again, we have to think about what our values are, right? And so do we value our economy more than the lives of these people? I guess that's for us to decide, right? Okay, I think that's enough genocide for me. Okay, that is it for today. Come back tomorrow. I'll hand back your quizzes tomorrow. We'll review them tomorrow, and I will, and then we'll go back to the war, because there's still a war going on in 1942, right? So we've got to get back. Meanwhile, back at the war, right? So tomorrow, back to the war. I'll see you all tomorrow. Good participation, online people. See you.